Hello, swing voters. Eric from Dead Tech here, and today I'm going to be doing another one of these niche videos, and this one is about whether I say niche or niche. I use those somewhat interchangeably, and I don't really know that I have any specific plans to stop. It's hard to pick a lane there, so actually, I'm going to do something a little more substantive. I'm just kidding. I am going to answer a second question, but before I get into the specifics of that, I'd like to thank people for writing in. I did one niche case study already, and the response to that was good, especially after I wrote a follow-up blog post asking you all to write in. So I have kind of a backlog of these already. That's why I've switched gears a little bit from the reader question roundups. But now the response to this seems good. So I think there's some validation here to the idea that maybe we tackle this whole, like, how do I identify and validate a niche problem by actually running through some reader questions and case studies and just kind of working our way there in that fashion. And then I can resume my blog series where I'm going to talk about marketing. If you want a link to that series, it's down below. So that's what's on the docket today. As for me, I'm doing very well. Thanks for asking.
You're good, man.
Life is good down here in the Florida Keys. Got another 3 weeks, and I'm actually going to take a vacation for the first time in a year. I think the only day I've taken off has been my birthday. So looking forward to that. Like we're living and working down here, but I'm actually going to have a vacation. So yeah, life is good. And what I'm going to be talking about here today is we have a reader question around the topic of a niche, and it is basically for engineers that are side hustling. I have knowledge about topics like project management, architecture, sort of like holistic project type topics that they might be receptive to. What do you think? So if that as a thing to dig into sounds interesting, stay tuned. Okay, so let's actually look at the question. I'm going to throw that up on the screen and we'll take a read through it here. So I took your advice. I've begun looking for ways to capitalize on my knowledge rather than my labor. I'll see if I can find a reference to the blog post that he's talking about there. I'm not offhand sure which one, because that sounds like a piece of advice I'd give a lot. One path started as a bit of sociology gleaned from observing programmers over the years. They sometimes have side projects but lack certain knowledge. For example, project planning, architecture, broader development processes, etc., making their endeavors more likely to die on the vine. As an aside, this is good so far. It's sensing a need in the market. It's about them more than it is about the person looking to fill this potential niche. I have that knowledge, and I was curious whether developers would be receptive to obtaining it. I bundled that insight into a condensed, digestible form and distributed it to people and discussed it with them at an event. Programmers seemed receptive to the information I provided, and they were not receiving or obtaining it from places such as computer science programs, boot camps, or employers. Another aside, that's also great. So this is an attempt to validate the niche rather than just saying I'm going to go build this whole business around it and assume it'll work. This is a great first step. Do a little bit of market research and see what happens. However, I cannot think of a way to monetize this niche readily. Setting up my own bootcamp or a collection of online courses seems like a rather time-consuming endeavor that may not yield the rewards to justify the required commitment. How would you approach this problem? Is there a way to capitalize on this need that does not require as significant a time commitment? Excellent questions all. I mean, I really love this. So I perceive a need. I'm going to go out and validate that with a little bit of market research. Hey, that went well, but the next step seems too big, and I don't want to throw a bunch of time and or money after it without doing a little more to validate that. I love the thinking. It's the perfect sort of thinking to go into business for yourself. So let's dive into this topic holistically. First of all, understand that what you have put together so far, whether notwithstanding the fact that you aren't selling it, but what you have called a condensed digestible form that you've distributed, this is called an info product or an informational product, Now, it doesn't sound like you're selling it, but it's that nonetheless. Info products include videos, like if you create a video that you sell, if you create a book or an ebook and you sell that. An info product is anything where you're selling information in exchange for, well, for money. You're selling information. And that can, as you point out later, include courses or more elaborate forms like setting up a boot camp or something. But it can be something as simple as a book or whatever it is that you've distributed here, like literally a flyer. You could throw up a payment infrastructure, take Stripe payments or whatever and sell a PDF. People do that. So this is called an info product, and I'm going to talk a little bit here about info products and my own take on them as a side hustle versus a permanent hustle. So I personally am bearish on info products as a full-time hustle. Bearish is a stock market term. If you don't know what that means, I'm not a fan of it. And this isn't to say that I think there's anything wrong with it per se, and do you. But what I have encountered is that it doesn't seem like people tend to have a lot of luck turning an info product business into a serious business. So let me speak to this a little bit. Info products, I think, maybe came to rise during the days where Tim Ferriss published the 4-Hour Workweek. So a lot of people, especially maybe in the programming world, that want to kind of blast out of there, read the 4-Hour Workweek, links below. It is a book that I recommend. It really gives you a lot of things to think about and can change your thinking. It was the inspiration, for instance, for my wife and I to be digital nomads. We had never thought of that before. And then I read that book and I was like, oh, remote work. If it doesn't matter where you're based, you can base anywhere. So it's a really good book, and I'm not here to knock it. But one of the things that he talks about is the idea of selling info products. So you take some knowledge that you have, like, hey, you learned to program in C++ and do embedded systems. And so your next thought is like, I could teach others to do that. And then the info product bug creeps in and you think, oh, I could make a living. Like instead of like doing training courses on site, I could just like record videos and put them up on a website and then set up some automation and people will just buy them. And then boom, I've automated my life. I've automated my income. I've realized the 4-Hour Workweek. I'm getting paid while I sleep. Life done. Retired at 35. And that's the allure of the info product lifestyle. Now, what I've actually seen play out in reality when it comes to info products is that people charge into it with a lot of hustle. They realize a lot of initial success in the early going. They extrapolate that success to think that it can be a full-time hustle. And then they enter this kind of Sisyphean struggle where they never actually realize the dream. And so they kind of go down one of three paths from what I've observed. Either you just give up and you kind of go back to doing something else, or you realize that info products maybe not the basis of a full-time hustle, so you put it as the bottom rung of your offering laddering, and you start to develop other things that you offer that really become the meat of what you're doing. So I've seen people go from doing info products to creating some kind of like publishing platform. I've seen people probably most commonly go from an info product to consulting around the info product, from creating an info product to doing training. So there's a lot of directions you can go where you figure this out. Like the info product should be kind of at the cheaper end of the things that I sell on my offering ladder. And then I have a more expensive offering. And the info product almost winds up being marketing for the real offering. And then the other route that I hope nobody here goes down is the info product huckster route.
Hi, it's Fitz with Slap Chop. You're going to be in a great mood all day because you're going to be slapping your troubles away with a slap chop. Now look, here's a potato.
Which is you decide that you're going to sell, let's say, architecture advice to developers with a side hustle. You go and you do that. It pays a little bit, but not enough. So you also create one about project management, and then that pays a little bit, but not enough. So you really start to flail and you say like, okay, well, crap, what else do I know? I need more of these. Let's see. Well, I did figure out how to start a side hustle, so I'll do a side hustle info product about starting a side hustle. And I do know how to teach people project management, so I'll create an info product about creating info products about project management. And what you see is this kind of info product flailing huckster that's just anything they've happened to do in the last 3 years. They're trying to sell the secret sauce to whatever they've dreamed up. And it results in this sort of comical situation where You might see somebody like this in my post about don't take advice from freelancers. You get a lot of people that go freelance and it doesn't work out very well. So what do for another line of income? They start trying to teach you to freelance, even though they're not good at it enough to like make a full-time living out of it. So that's the route I really don't want to see anybody go down, and it does happen. It's kind of sad, especially when, you know, these people are feeling a real pressure. They've gone off on their own and they have rent to pay. So like, I get it, but here be dragons when it comes to a business based on info products. So that's the first thing that I wanted to say there. Not saying you can't make a living doing info products, people do it, but I think that what happens that people don't realize is that info products make a nice, easy side hustle. So you put up a course and then you tell or maybe it's a book or whatever it is, and you tell your coworkers and your friends and family, like, hey, I did this thing. And you're not depending on it for a living. So you're not being about selling it to them. And they go and they buy it, and you start to say, wow, I'm earning like $500 a month. If I could just, you know, instead of 2 hours a week of work for $500 a month or something, you know, whatever it is, I could just scale that up all the way to a full-time job. Well, it doesn't tend to scale that easily because of a variety of reasons. You might have saturated the market. You would have to kind of take a different marketing tack to reach thousands or tens of thousands of people than you would a handful. So there's all sorts of reasons that the scale isn't there in the way you might think. So an info product, you know, like the book I wrote, Developer Hegemony, I don't know what you all think I make from that, but it's not a ton. I'd have to write like 20 of those to earn a living. And so that doesn't scale very well, and it's better to recognize the danger of that ahead of time. So that's info products, although it doesn't sound like you're committed to doing an info product. I wanted to get that out there and kind of make my views on info products clear. They're great. It's great as a side hustle, and it's great as the lowest tier thing that a customer might engage you for. I'd be careful of trying to plan a full-time hustle around info products. Another thing that I'll note here, just as a cautionary thing to bear in mind in this particular niche, is that you are going from B2B, business to business, and you're talking about something that's B2C, business to consumer. Your consumers happen to be software engineers, and they might have a professional interest, but their company isn't going to be paying the bill. Meaning you are addressing consumers that happen to be software engineers. You're not addressing them in their professional capacity. Their employer, nobody commercial has any interest in doing this unless you enable them to make their side hustle kind of a full-time hustle, side project, they commercialize it. Then there's kind of a commercial interest, but understand you're selling to consumers, and that's a different thing. If you have worked as an employee all your life or as a freelancer, literally everything you've done commercially has been business to business, and business to business tends to be higher ticket sales and fewer of them and higher touch and all that. And B2C tends to be a much different animal. You might have a price point of $10 for an ebook, and that's the kind of transaction that happens all in one visit. You throw up a landing page, you send some AdWords to it, and somebody will get out their wallet and plunk down a credit card and pay you $10 without too much second thought.
I bet it all.
Gets a little more complicated if you go from like 10 to 100 in your pricing. That gets to be less of an impulse purchase. If you go up to 1,000, well, now you're almost in B2C price or B2B pricing territory. So I'm mentioning all this just to understand that you're wading into waters that you haven't been in before, which is that selling to consumers, especially depending on the price point, is a much different style of transaction than you're probably used to. No reason not to do it. It's just be prepared for that you've got maybe more learning to do versus it might be weird or you might not be especially good at it in life, but you do have a framework for B2B sales. If nothing else, job interviews are that. You're showing up and you're selling 6 figures worth of labor to them, and you're going, through a scripted kind of thing on their end, but however that sales conversation goes, it's something you've done. You understand that sales process versus the B2C one, maybe not so much. All right, there's another thing that I want to dive into here a little bit, and I'm going to link below. There's a podcast I listen to called The Tropical MBA. It is a podcast for digital nomad entrepreneurs like myself. I'm a member of a group called the Dynamite Circle, and the owners of that do this podcast. The name, don't worry about the name. It's if you want to listen to it, it's really a lot of valuable advice for entrepreneurs and aspiring entrepreneurs. The name is kind of a reference to the 4-hour work week concept and the idea that like a lot of the people in the digital nomad community go to places like Thailand or Colombia or what have you, and they are in tropical locations running businesses. So that's the idea behind the name. But it is basically an entrepreneurship podcast. Anyway, they talk a lot about this idea of the knowledge gap versus the efficiency gap. And if you want to understand what this means, imagine a Thai food restaurant in town. And you go in and you order your food and you're talking to the owner. And you ask how business is, and the owner says, we're just getting killed ever since the pandemic. Like, nobody's really coming in. Our orders have dropped off to kind of a trickle. And you realize they don't have a website. And so you say to the owner, hey, in this new pandemic world, if you order or if you throw up a website and you offer, like contactless pickup and delivery through the website, you're going to capture maybe a lot of the business you weren't capturing. So for the owner, if this is not a technologically savvy person, mind blown. This is a whole new way of doing things. You have opened up a whole new world.
You don't want to go for a ride, do you? We could get out of the palace, see the world.
Is it safe?
Sure, do you trust me?
You have filled a knowledge gap. Now, let's say that in a different universe, the same Thai place, you go in and ask how business is, and the owner says a similar thing, but the owner says, I don't really understand it. We have a website up, we offer contactless order and pickup and delivery through the website, and it's just not really working. So you, wearing a technical hat, you go and you order through the website, and you see that the order form is like flaky and buggy, and it's a terrible user experience, and you see that it's written in Rails, and you're a Rails engineer, so hey, I could fix this for you. You bring in, give me like $500 and I'll do X, Y, and Z, and you will get a lot fewer people bouncing in the order form. This is the efficiency gap. So the purveyor of this restaurant already understands the value of a website and contactless pickup and all that. It's just the owner isn't executing it very well. So here you are to bring better skills, better execution, more efficiency to bear. And that's the efficiency gap. Now, why am I mentioning this? Well, because what we're talking about here with this sort of niche is it speaks to being a knowledge gap issue. And what I mean here, or the difficulty, the cautionary tale about knowledge gap stuff is, number one, it's a harder sale, typically. And number two, it's easier for the customer to become antsy during the course of the service delivery. So here's what I mean. Imagine that you're talking to the Thai food owner again, and this person has no idea about websites or whatever. And so over maybe a couple of beers in the course of an evening, you say, listen, if you invest $5,000 with me, I'm just going to blow your mind. I'm going to build this website. It's going to be great. You're going to have so many orders. So you convince this person, and this is what I call the two-sale problem. If it's a knowledge gap, you have to first convince them that they have a problem that's addressable by what you do, like convince them of the idea in the first place. And then secondarily, you have to convince them to invest in you as the purveyor of the solution. So let's assume that you do this. So the Thai food restaurant owner gives you $5,000. You actually successfully make 2 sales. You get the money. Well, now this person who up until this point had never thought of having a website, never thought about spending this type of money, this person's going to get nervous and think, well, okay, I've done some math, and if I'm going to even have a chance at recouping this investment within 6 months, I need $200 in incremental sales every day. And for the first, 4 days, patience, like, okay, it's going to take a little while. Day 5, you're getting a phone call. Where's my extra $200? Like, you said this would work. It's not working. And here you are saying, oh, be patient. And you're thinking, oh, crap, did I miscalculate the market or whatever? So you have the 2-sale problem up front. And then you also have this kind of service delivery problem of a nervous customer. So the knowledge gap, I would say, solving the knowledge gap, much higher risk, much higher potential reward, but kind of higher stakes and higher angst across the board. Efficiency gap, this is what I've filled mostly over the years. For instance, with Hit Subscribe, we don't try to convince companies that they should have a blog. We get in front of companies when they are trying to scale up their content, and they're basically saying during the sales call, hey, I've tried a lot of things. It's really hard to get people to write content. Much easier sale when they're basically coming to me and saying, hey, I've tried everything, can you help me? Than it is if I were to go to a company that doesn't really believe in the blog as a marketing asset and say, you really ought to blog and you also ought to pay me to do it. So that's as a personal aside, I'm a big efficiency gap person. Circling all the way back to this question, you are talking about knowledge gap type stuff. So you go to some conference and you find developers that have side projects where, whatever they are, maybe they're trying to commercialize them or not. And you're going to go to them and say, you could really use some project management or you need some architecture. This gets into the sort of, somebody brings in their car for the battery light being on, thinking they need a new battery. And then the place says, hey, do you want us to do a free alignment check? You say, sure. And then they say, well, turns out you need your alignment fixed, you should give us money. Now, even if that's a good faith thing, what's happening to you as the consumer of this service is you're being told you have a problem that you've never perceived before, and you're being told that you need to fix it. So again, this speaks to the to sale, but this is what the folks at the conference or who you're talking to that's the frame of mind they're going to be in. I have a side project, it's going all right, I guess it could be going better. You come along and say, well, what you really need is some project management understanding or some like architecture principles or what have you. And they're thinking like, I've never perceived that as a problem, but since you're actually giving it away for free, I'm receptive. You might run into trouble then when they take your free info product or they take your free advice. And part of that is to say like, yeah, you really ought to give me money. So that's another challenge that you're facing. So having teed all that up as kind of the cautionary tale of going into this niche, I was pretty praising of the thinking going into it, and I remain that way. I think there's a lot of potential here. So let's talk first about your question, like how would you validate this? So I'd say the first thing I would do is pick one of the things that you're talking about, unless you've already kind of balled them all together. So is it planning? Is it architecture? Is it process? Because those are three different things. And the trouble with three different things is that you run the risk of being too fragmented and you're just saying like, here's all the different stuff that you should think about or whatever. It might get harder to package up. So you might consider separating them out. If you can't, or if that's not easy, then it's no problem. Because really what I'd suggest doing is getting to see if people will engage at a higher level of commitment. So what you're doing right now is the equivalent of a bouncer outside of a club, like handing out cards, like, hey, we're having a show later. And if you're the people at the conference, even if you have zero interest, it's easier to take the card and just throw it out at the next garbage can you encounter than it is to be like, oh, no, I don't want that. So you need to see if people will give something up of value in exchange for this thing. And that could be money. So you could package this up into an inexpensive ebook and sell it. You could package this up into an ebook and just give it away and see if people download and read it. Or you could do something like just ask for an email address or contact information as the exchange of value and say, hey, I've put together this thing. I'm going to email it to you as a PDF if you sign up. Or maybe you drip it out as like an email tips and tricks or a course or something. And so what you want to do to advance things a little bit without a lot of commitment or infrastructure is just see if people will commit to a little bit more, giving away their information or making a small purchase. And that'll tell you a lot, because it's one thing for you to just hand this out and say, hey, do you want some advice or do you want this thing? And people are like, yeah, okay. If they sort of have to actively engage and give up something of value, that's going to tell you something. So if you get a lot of those signups, you're onto something and you should keep going. If nobody seems interested in doing this, you get it. And I should say, don't write this off if you put up like, hey, sign up for my email list and it gets no visitors. That's a different problem. But if you manage to get 100, 200, 1,000 people to the site and nobody signs up, well, if they're not even willing to give you an email address, they're probably not willing to pay for it.
I will never sleep with you. Never, ever. Not ever.
We don't open for the no sex oaths until 9 a.m.
So that's the low-hanging fruit for validation. The next thing that I'll say here, the way I might tune this or go about pursuing it, like what would I do in this position? The first thing I would do is notice that this is still a little bit you-focused in the sense of it's good that you're out doing this market research. You've identified the persona here, which is engineers with a side project. So you're thinking about them and you're thinking about their pain, but it's still kind of like, here's some stuff I know. How can I get it to them? what do these folks really want? Like, what are their pains? Because their pain isn't, gosh, I wish I knew a project management method. I mean, like that, yeah, you could teach them that as sort of a means to an end, but what are you really driving at? And then think about how could you help those folks with those outcomes. So the niche here isn't really side hustling engineers need to understand architecture and project management. What their pain really is, I have this side project that's getting out of control. Like, it was fun at first and now it's a headache and it's just too much and I'm going to leave it. Or I have this side project, and if I were going to take it to the next level and monetize it, I'd need to do something to it. This isn't sustainable. So as a next step, I would start talking to these side project owners, and rather than assuming that your knowledge is the secret sauce that ought to be dropped on them and then joy will happen, I would go out and see what actual pains they have and figure out, like, is it true that a lack of project planning is their problem? What is it that, what are their pains around their side project? Is it getting unwieldy and out of control because they don't know how to structure it and it's tech debt? Is it a lack of time? Is it that they're putting it in open source capacity and they're getting buried in angry feature requests or bug reports or whatever? What actual problem are they solving or facing? And then think about solving that problem. So the question would be more like, how does your knowledge help them solve their problem and drive to an actual outcome? And so in the end here, you want to be looking to sell outcomes. And the outcome might be, I take this side project and I do X, Y, and Z to it with you, and then you are ready to take it to a launch. Like, you are ready to start charging for it. Or I take the side project that you're looking at and you never want to work on, and I help you turn it into something that's beautiful and fun again. So those are the kind of things that I would really look to do next. They're looking for how this side project can be successful or how it can be fun or whatever the case may be. And so get to the point where you're filling this niche by selling those outcomes, or at least selling a very clear path to the outcome. So if I have a side project and you come to me and say, you could really use some architecture and some project planning, well, okay, I'm receptive. But if you come to me and say, hey, what's going on? What's your biggest pain with your side project? And I say, oh man, I can just never find the time to work on it. Like, in the beginning, I was super excited about it and it was, easy, but now there's just like all this code and I implemented all this stuff wrong in the beginning and I don't even feel like touching it anymore. Now you're onto something, because that's a problem you can solve. In a sales conversation, you could say to me like, well, what if I were to make it fun again? Like, I have this system of X, Y, and Z that I could sell you, or I could do whatever. But the outcome is, for me, imagine that joy you felt at the beginning of the side hustle, the side project, and imagine having that again, but now. That's where you're really going to get that aha, I'm ready to give you money moment. All right, so hoping this is interesting again. Let me know in the comments down below. I'm going to keep doing these in the reader question roundups. If I do enough of these, I might record like a stock outro for these. But if you find this interesting, please let me know that. I'm pleased with the response so far. As a bit of housekeeping, if you want to ask me a question, either for the roundup or you want to submit a niche case study, you can do that at deadtech.com/ask. Link down below, or frankly, you can just throw it in the comments. If you ask me a question about niche or something in the comments, I will capture that, put it on my Trello board of reader questions. So either one of those works. Thank you as always for watching. It is fun to do these. I appreciate the viewership and the engagement. If you did like this, I'd love it if you would give me a like. It helps grow the channel. If you didn't like it, hit me with a thumbs down. Your feedback, such as it is welcome, and it is yours to give. If you haven't subscribed, you can go and hit subscribe, and if you hit the bell next to it, it'll send you an email or do something whenever I produce a new video, so you can always do that. And yeah, thanks again for watching, and I will catch you next time.